I would like to introduce Liz Endsley. She's an assistant professor here at Weatherford College and has taught for Weatherford College since 2011. She graduated with her bachelor's degree from TCU in 2005 and went on to graduate with her master's degree in liberal arts from Dallas Baptist University in 2011. Besides being a huge history nerd, Liz Endsley is also an avid horseman. She has worked, trained, and competed in the horse industry for over, 30 years, and has been fortunate enough to train many horses that won world championship titles and national championship titles. She is excited to be able to speak today on this topic and brings both her passions of history and horses to life. Note about technology. We have a very super sensitive mic in this room, so if you make any noises or anything, it will be picked up and you will be on YouTube for the rest of your life.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Well, big hello to everybody. Thank you, everybody, for coming today. I know it's a Friday and there is no class, so thank you, everybody, for participating and attending this lecture, which hopefully you will enjoy. This is a story that's gotten lost throughout World War II. It's a story that's not famous in World War II. It may not be the most exciting story from World War II, but it is definitely a story that deserves to be told and receive more and more clout. It's about a group of ghost riders, a group of soldiers under the command of General George Patton, who will be responsible for saving more than 1,000 horses that are priceless and some of the most original and unique in the entire world. But is anybody really familiar with what a Lipizzan horse is? A few? Nice. Usually there's nobody. Well, just to give you a little bit of backstory, it's a horse that has over 450 years worth of breeding, throughout time, throughout the course of Europe. It got started in the Hungarian Empire. It got started a little bit throughout the country of Spain back in the 1400s. But it's in the 1500s where it really kind of started to pick off. The actual breed itself was born. And there was a lovely man by the name of Charles II, who actually was the brother of a man by the name of Maximilian II, who went on to become the Holy Roman Emperor, who decided that he wanted to be responsible for the birth and starting of this breed, opened up the first stud farm ever in Italy, in this little town called Lipizzaners, which is where Lipizzan name comes from. He had 9 stallions, he had 24 broodmares, and they'll be responsible for really creating this breed, starting this breed as permeating it and launching it into infamy. Which, the greatest characteristic, everyone knows the look of a Lipizzan because they're bleach white. I mean, they're absolutely beautiful. Did you know they weren't born bleach white? They are born dark. They are born incredibly dark, as are, by the way, most baby horses across, every breed across the world, thoroughbred, quarter horse, etc., etc. But when a horse is born, the way you can tell it's going to end up being white, or gray per se, as they call it, is if it has a white, fur right here around its eye, so that when the baby fur itself dies, sheds out as the horse starts to mature, the gray coat is in fact underneath. And again, this is every horse breed across the country. But back in the 1500s, as these horses were being born, immediately they're so rare. There were only 3,000 or 4,000 of them in history throughout the entire world. So they were all, if they were purebred, they were being branded. Wasn't exactly the way it is today, where we have computers, we have the internet, where we can keep actual records on our computers or in file. Nope, it was all kept on branding. So babies will be branded with an L on the cheek for Lipizzan. They will be branded with the name of the dam, the mother, on the right hip, the dam of the sire on the left hip, and a lot of them will be branded with the first letter of the farm where they have been born, so they can keep track of who is who and where was where, right? But even if born dark, Lipizzans themselves do not turn officially bleach white until the age of 6 years old. And 1 in 100, by the way, never turn white. 1 in 100 always stay dark. Can you imagine how much those will cost you? Throwing that out there. But about 2 or 3 years old, they start to fade from dark to, from dark gray, more and more gray, and then by 6 years old, they are that beautiful sheen of complete, brilliant bleach white. And it is the same family who started to breed these horses, create this breed in the first place, the family of Charles and Maximilian II, who also created the school called the Spanish Riding School in this little town called Vienna, Austria, which these horses were, again, bred, they were raised, and then about 3.5 years old, which, by the way, is later, quarter horses and thoroughbreds we can break and start to ride and train at 2 years old, right? Due to their conformation, Lipizzans can't be broken or trained until about 3.5 years old. But then they would be trained, they would be taught the classical art of dressage, another classical European riding, and they would be, they would perform. But originally only for the Spanish nobility. Spanish, Maximilian himself, friends of the nobility, friends of royalty. The public didn't even know they existed. They were kept completely hidden away in secret for many, many years. But thankfully, that will fade. Time goes on. We hit the 1700s. We move more and more into fruition. And obviously, the school will be opened for the public. They will, Lipizzaners will be used for more and more across the continent of Europe in different countries. And eventually, by 1900, will even start to be used in the Olympics. Which equestrianism was added onto the Summer Olympics alone, only starting in 1900, a little over 100 years ago, right? So equestrianism first was seen in the Summer Olympics in Paris, France, about 1900, and didn't decide if they liked it or not, took it away for a few years, but came back permanently in 1912. But the story, so that's the origin of it, but the story really picks up about 1936, when there was this brand new country on the scene, a young republic called Austria. And the first ever equestrian Olympian for the new country of Austria was a man by the name of Alois Bajowski. Say that name 5 times fast. Throwing that out there. But Bajowski was representing this new country of Austria and did end up in 1936 winning the bronze medal. However, interesting side note, he was supposed to win the gold. The 1936 Summer Olympics were being held in Berlin, and he was set to win the gold medal, with the silver and bronze riders being German. Well, when the German judge realized that Bajowski was going to win gold, Germany was coming in second and third, not happening, changed his score, lowered his final results, he ended up winning the bronze, with Germany winning gold and silver. Hashtag controversial? Still is controversial to this day, but in this day and age, that's where it really went uncontested. It was what it was. We're just happy that we won a bronze medal at all in our first Olympics, right? And it was his specific ride in dressage with his Lipizzaners stallion that'll really be responsible for this whole thing coming to fruition at all. Because his ride was noted by a German horseman by the name of Gustav Roh. Now, Gustav Roh was probably one of the most accomplished horsemen in all of Germany, since, for the test of time, one of the most respected horsemen ever for the country of Germany. He got his start as a journalist in the 1912 Olympics, but since the 1912 Olympics, he had been basically the backbone of establishing all of the United States, all Olympic equestrian events from that point on. But not only that, come 1936, not only is he basically responsible for all, responsible for all equestrian Olympic events, he's actually also under command of Adolf Hitler. 1936, we're getting closer and closer to the start of World War I, right? And during not only is Hitler putting, that in further closer and closer steps, but there are other things that he is under his belt that he is working on inside the country of Germany right now. Things like creating this Aryan race of people. We're familiar with it, right? Hitler's whole pretension of wanting to create the perfect Aryan race of human beings. Well, guess what? There was a need to also, and there want to also create the perfect type of Aryan horse for the German army to use. In which this became the role, the mission for Gustav Roh, which the perfect horse would be one that would be completely bleached white, basically imperial, identical. They would all be identical. But not only that, they would have these strains and these traits being intelligent, but also beautiful and pretty, beautiful look to the eye. Endurance and strength, hold up in terms of combat and war, muscular, energetic, but not too overexcited. Smart, intelligent, and driven, but not too over-anxious, per se, the perfect war horse. He had already started the process of kidnapping and stealing across Europe Arabs to be used for their strength and endurance. He had started kidnapping and stealing across Europe thoroughbreds due to their speed, but due to the look and the want of the perfect Aryan horse for the German military, there would be no better than the Lipizzaners stallion. So he added this onto the mix. After seeing Bajowski ride in the Olympics, decided that was the heart of this pure breed that he wanted to create. So just like the Arabs he was stealing / kidnapping, in his own words, the same thing would start to happen across Europe with all these countries that did have bizarre mares and foals that he could use for breeding. And he needed the perfect place to hide them because they had been stolen, they had been kidnapped. And he found this little economic jewel in Czechoslovakia, this farm called Postal, where it was set up for breeding already. It was a horse farm operation, but nobody knew of its existence per se much in this day and age. Perfect place to breed this perfect type of Aryan race. Hired a man by the name of Hubert Radowski to oversee the farm in his stead as he was off fighting in World War II, and this breeding program was put in place. By 1944, the first Aryan breed of horse had its little feet, full feet on the ground. Everything was going according to plan, right? Except for one thing. What else could possibly be happening in 1944? The war is falling in favor of the Allied powers, right? So, not only is it falling in favor of the Allied powers, the need for this German horse was kind of put on the back burner, but also Allied powers were moving closer and closer to Germany and the countries surrounding it by the leaps and bounds. I mean, the Russian army was moving into countries such as Austria from the ground, while the Allied powers, however, were bombing the crud out of it from the skies, using their B-17s. And there were so many air raids that were happening around in Austria, around this Finnish riding school. I mean, they were happening almost on this daily basis, so many times that the Lipizzaners stallions that were still being bred and performing at this Finnish riding school would recognize the signal for the airstrikes. They knew it was coming. Their whole behavior would change. But up until 44, Podolsky had not been allowed to remove them, take them somewhere safer. Because as this war fell again more and more favor of the Allied powers, the people of Vienna, I mean, there was a lot of depression, a lot of heartbrokenness, a lot of despair as the war was ending and not in their favor. So Podolsky was still expected to perform, to bring out his stallions, to have his stallions dance across the streets of this war, to keep the people lighthearted and pretend like everything was normal, right? Because that'll totally work. Which he had been doing, though. He had been doing dutifully. But it got to the point where there were so many airstrikes occurring, he was worried that it wouldn't be long until all his horses were really bombed into oblivion, until they all perished. So he spent the whole concept of pursuing commander and commander, climbing the ranks, trying to figure out who to contact, who would be the perfect person to help him. Finally got a hold of Gustav Raab, who allowed him and gave him permission for his precious stallions to also be moved to the breeding farm of Hostau for safekeeping, which at the time was a huge relief, right? It was this huge relief. Podolsky would go on to join the German army, he'd be put in control of protection of a town by the name of St. Martin, and everything, once again, seemed to be going okay according to plan. Not so much, though. Again, fall of 1944, this war is turning more and more in favor of the Allied powers. I mean, there's this shocking event, I'm betting we've never heard of before. It was this event that happened, December 7th, 1941, right? Caused the United States to join this war, right? So by 1944, we do have troops, we do have battalions all over Europe, including battalions led by the great General George Patton. One of those battalions under the command of George Patton, who's in charge of the Third Army, was a command by the name of the 2nd Cavalry Unit. 2nd Cavalry Unit was under the command of Colonel Charles Reed, aka better known to history as Hank Reed, right? And this, the goal fruition, the job of the 2nd Cavalry, Patton put them in the position, they were to push ahead of the slower infantry units, engage in a lot of hand-to-hand combat with German troops from time to time. One of their final orders was this 9-month trek from Normandy all the way to this little city in Czechoslovakia called Asch, secure all German cities under Allied control, right? And they became known as the ghosts of Patton's army, the Ghost Riders, because they had this uncanny fruition of being able to get behind German lines and nobody could figure out how the crap they did it, right? So these Ghost Riders, they came to be called, who served under Patton, led by Reed. Well, eventually that 9 months is over. They have achieved their goal. They are in Asch, Czechoslovakia. But they also noted too that as this 9-month campaign came to an end, the German soldiers and the German armies that they were coming across, they were starting to surrender more and more, as then they knew that this war was coming to an end. So there was a little bit of a drop. There was a little bit more of a drop in guard, regarding German soldiers for them in this day and age. Which is why, when this very weird event happens in April of 1945, they're a little bit more open to it than they would have been maybe 9 months ago. Anyway, and so Colonel Reed and the 2nd Cavalry Unit, they're in Asch, Czechoslovakia, and Reed gets to knock on the door and said, "We have a weird little German colonel here. that's demanding to speak to you, and he's like, you have a what now? Turns out, April 26, 1944, this German car that had white flags tied to its aerial had just been flagged down, white flags showing that it was peaceful, right? And a German had got on the car, and in broken English, had all he would say over and over and over as over was he had to talk to someone in command of the American Army. Well, who are you? Nope, I need to talk to someone in command of the American Army. Okay, but nope, I need to talk to me. Over, it's all he would say, over and over and over and over. But he came in peace, white flags flying. They didn't know what else to do, so they brought him to Reed. To where when Reed asked him, well, who in the heck are you? This is absolutely making no sense. Can you at least tell us your name? He still wouldn't give his full name. All he would say over and over and over is Oberst Walter, no, you can refer to me as Oberst Walter H. Which in German, Oberst is basically the equivalent of colonel. But all he would give was the name Oberst Walter H. Walter H. Over and over and over. Tedious, right? They say, okay, fine, you don't want to tell us who you are? We'll figure it out. His wallet is taken and it's searched to hopefully find some type of, badge, identification card. But when they opened his wallet and searched it, all they found were pictures of these bleached white, beautiful horses. And they're like, what in the holy is happening, right? Let's get a few of these in the space to make sure I get through this thing. Turns out, which pretty quickly became apparent as reading these pictures, he's obviously a horseman. He's obviously a horse lover. And being able to even tell that, even though you were having an American and a German brought together by an obvious love of horses, Walter H. felt safe enough to drop this guard and spill the story. His name was Walter the Holsters, and he had taken those pictures himself about 5 days ago at a farm he had discovered called Hostal. Now, he also went on to admit that he was a captain, or he was a colonel in charge of the specific air raid, who, at the same moment in time, had in their possession suitcases and suitcases and suitcases full of files, pictures, and reports stolen from the Russian army. They had all these suitcases full of information on the enemy, but they had to stop for fuel. So they stopped for fuel in this little town called Waste and buried all the suitcases, so only they knew where they were. Buried the suitcases for protection, but as they were there stopping to rest, regroup, get fuel, they had come across the farm of Hostal, not far from where they were, and discovered the horses. Not only did they discover the horses, they determined that there were actually hundreds of prisoners of war, POWs being held in this camp too, from Britain, France, New Zealand, Serbia, etc., etc. And all of them, people and horses alike, were in immediate danger. For the Russian army didn't know about Hostal, thank God, otherwise the story wouldn't even be in fruition today. But they were camped about 2 or 3 days only away from the camp. And if the Russians did in fact, learn of its location or learn of the horses there, at this point we have over 600 bizarre horses, mare's baby stallions. We have thoroughbreds, we have Arabians, we have some, few others from, that have been captured as prisoner of war horses. Over 1,000 horses that were priceless, no dollar amount. And if they were discovered by the Russians, it was noted they would all be slaughtered for food. The Russians their provisions were less than adequate, let's just say. They had absolutely no interest in the worth of the horses. They were more interested in turning them literally into horse burgers. And so all of these priceless animals' lives were in danger of being slaughtered. And as Rita is kind of like, are you sure? Right? Are we quite sure this is kind of evident, this is actually reality? And he's like, dang straight it is. He went to tell them another story of not long ago when the Russians had actually come across about 24 purebred Lipizzaners over by the border of Budapest. And originally upon coming across the horses, the Russians had instantly shot and killed 18 of them, and right there it started to process them up for food, with the others being loaded to pull heavy artillery, to pull heavy ammunition carts, etc., had been taken off. They had never been seen again. No guess there what had happened. And anybody who had tried to stop the Russians from slaughtering these horses, the riders, the grooms that were with them, have been beaten, have been raped, have been tortured, have been bayoneted, have been shot, is absolutely obliterated. And there was no doubt that considering what the Russians have done before to all horses they had come across, if they discovered the farm, all these horses would be slaughtered. Their only hope at this point, considering how the war had turned, their only hope was for the Americans, for them to bring the horses to the Americans, and the Americans promised their safeguard. Which emotionally on this thing. Emotionally, there's nothing more he would rather do than rescue these horses. But he is a freaking colonel in the military. He does have to proceed cautiously and intelligently, right? So he makes holsters a deal, which was pretty risky for both sides, we'll be honest. He says, look, if you agree, if you agree to turn over all the documentation you have on the Russian army, we will help you. All of this information, all these documents, these photos, these files that you had that you were going to use for your agenda, you turn them over to us. And then on top of that, we want you to go with us to the European headquarters and help us cipher through all of them. He promised they would not be treated as prisoners of war, they'd be treated as allied powers, but they're giving up one of their massive bargaining chips they have in the course of this war. It's a big price to pay, but is a price bigger than 1,000 priceless horses? The answer is no. Holters will agree to this, and Fred says, okay, bring us the horses. They will be safe kept. Well, hot dog, good to go, right? Not so much. Holters will send a letter to the farm to Colonel Radusky saying, hey, bring the horses here, the Americans are on board, we're good to go. Except there's a problem. It's like, great, but not quite. Colonel Radusky will get this letter, inform the two primary veterinarians on the farm who run this farm with him. Their names were Rudolph Lessing and Gustav Kroll. You can say this 5 times fast. You know the situation, but there's a problem. It's foaling season. Most of these mares are giving birth. There's tiny, itty-bitty day-old foals on the ground. Mares and foals in conditions that are not optimal. They can't cross all the terrain they need to cross to get to the Americans. Plus, there's too many horses. Plus, they don't have vans. They don't have trailers. They have no way to move these horses. So we've got the Americans promising protection, but they can't get the horses to them. The Americans, for this to happen, have to go to them. Not only would this mean Americans would have to go over enemy line after enemy line after enemy line enter German territory, but there's another problem. February, just a few months before, February 1945, at the Yalta Conference, President Roosevelt had been there, Winston Churchill had been there, Stalin had been there, and in that conference, an agreement had been made. It had been decided that everywhere east of the German border, from this point on, would be under Russian control, and the Americans were absolutely forbid from entering this territory whatsoever. Hashtag Hofstall was now Russian territory. So not only will we be putting our lives in terms of moving across German lines, now we're going to be seen as enemies as we move across Russian lines. Now this is doing nothing but putting Reed and his men's lives on the line for horses that aren't even theirs. I mean, is this really worth it? Because now it's twice as dangerous as it worth it. Plus, he doesn't have permission, right? He doesn't, he can't make this decision either. He's not fully in command of this thing. General Patton is. So there's a whole lot of red tape we have to sort through here. But for, whether we do this or not, first the decision has to come from Patton himself. Now, Patton. Patton is an interesting duck, especially in this day and age. Patton has just turned 6 years old, and he is absolutely devastated. The war is fixing to come to an end. The fact that the blood and the guts and the violence and the gore is ending is just awful. This man loves war. He loves violence. He loves this type of lifestyle. And the fact that it's ending and he's not at the head of this thing, he hates. I mean, this man's been in military circles and got his feet wet, starting way back in 1916, when he fought against the great Pancho Villa in Mexico, right? This war is coming to an end. His name's not on the records yet. Well, here comes this secret mission all of a sudden across telegraph lines that just sounds really freaking cool, right? And of course, his own quote talking about the end of the war, it's hilarious, blah, blah, blah. He says, talking about the end of the war, he says, there's nothing interesting happening here. The war is sort of dragging its end out to a non-spectacular termination, and I feel lower than whale tracks at the bottom of the ocean. It's a little dramatic, right? Just here saying it. But now here's a secret mission. It's like hot freaking dog, heck to the yeah, right? So, no, he himself will not lead it. Throughout history, he's received all the credit for leading this mission. Guys, he didn't lead it. He just gave the thumbs up okay. Reed will lead it. But he will send a message back to Reed. Short but sweet, right? He says, get him. Make it fast. You we'll have a new mission. That's all, but it is a thumbs up. But he also lets it be known this mission will be off the records. This will not go down in history whatsoever fashion. So if it succeeds, Reed knows Patton's going to take all the fame, he's going to take all the glory, he's going to get all the credit, and you know what? That's fine. As long as the horses are safe, Reed is fine with that. It's okay. But if this mission goes south and they fail, all that will be remembered of Colonel Reed and the 2nd Cavalry is that they were turned out, they got lost, and something happened to them in Czechoslovakia. Their story would never be told. They would have just disappeared somewhere in Czechoslovakia with no real proof of what ever happened. So not only is it his life on the line, his men's lives on the line, his reputation, his legacy on the line, Patton's going to get all the glory. Was it really worth it? Reed has to mull this over. But of course, the answer is a pretty quick yes, right? When it comes down to it, the horses are worth more than his reputation, and the horses are worth more. Let's get some of these space and time so I can get through this whole thing. The horses are worth more than, are worth the risk in his mind and eye. So here you have Americans and Germans, guys. World War II, complete enemies from day one, on either side of this mission from day one. Americans and Germans now willing to trust each other, work together, and fight side by side on this thing with one common goal: get these horses out safely at all costs. Two enemies brought together by their love of horses. But this plan will have a threefold mission. Troop A, they will depart, where they are, Czechoslovakia. They will depart. The first group going way around to the north to make sure that coast is clear, everything is secure, get to hostile that way. Troop F would follow the path that will be led by Lessing. Colonel Lessing, the veterinarian, Rudolph Lessing will lead them through a path, the quickest route to get the majority of them there. And the third troop, Troop C, would go way around to the south, to the back of the farm, to hopefully find and rescue all the prisoners of war being held there. It's a threefold plan. But here we go. Across German lines we will cross. We will have to secretly sneak across Russian lines at this point, which is a good thing. We've been noted as the ghost of Patton's army, right? We are really, really good at getting behind enemy lines without anybody seeing us. Thank God, right? And it will work. Lessing rides ahead. He's leading the 2nd Brigade. Lessing will lead them from the American camp to hostile, but obviously be riding ahead. We'll get there as quick as possible to inform Colonel Radowski the Americans were approaching. This thing is going to happen. But the quickness of getting there to be like, the Americans are coming. The Americans are coming. Was not necessary. He could hear the tanks. He could hear the tanks. He could hear the armored cars. And as they get louder and louder, you've got Lessing and the other veterinarian, Kroll and Radowski, flying around the farm, trying to take down all pictures of Hitler. Because again, that's the last thing we need up with the Americans there, right? Take down all pictures of Hitler. They're hanging out white sheets and white blankets on all windows, again, to appear open and welcoming to the Americans' presence. And all big tracks, the American, Troop A, Troop F, Troop C. Long story short, within a day, we'll all successfully enter the territory of hostile. Radowski comes out to meet Colonel Reed, and again, the German colonel and the American colonel shake hands, in a welcoming fashion, two enemies brought together on the same issue. Which it is important to know, because Radowski doesn't get near as much credit as he deserves in this thing. For let's be quite honest, he's really nervous, and he's really nervous about this whole thing, and he's really torn over this issue because he is a loyal German. He is loyal to Hitler. These are Hitler's horses that Gustav Varel hired him and left him behind because he swore to protect. And now not only is he fixing to join up with their mortal enemies, he's fixing to give away all of his Emperor's horses. He's going to go down in history as a traitor. His reputation is going to be trashed. But again, he makes the same determination Reed does. Reputation, 1,000 priceless horses. It's no contest. Reed gets there, the Americans get there for the next 2 weeks. There's over 1,000 horses. They all have to be examined. One by one they're brought out. They are all examined. Their conditions have to be met. Baby mares are still having foals. Babies are hitting the ground. We have to build horse-moving transportation. So we're there pretty calmly, pretty good space of time for about 3 weeks. I just said 3 weeks. Don't ask me where it came from. How about 2? That sounds way better. We're there for about 2 weeks. We get there April 28th. About May 9th or so, the rumblings start to occur. We know it's coming. May 9th, Americans receive word. The Russians know of their presence. Not only have the Russians discovered the location of Hostel, but they know the Americans are there. We're quickly trying to hustle. We're trying to continue to build these vans. We're trying to build these ramps. We're trying to get this whole game plan set, but it's just not in the right amount of time. We look, the morning of May 12th, we look up, and what do we see in the distance? Coming into the location of Hostel, we see Soviet T-34s rolling down the road with a plane entering the farm. Russians get inside Hostel, this thing's over. The Americans, there'll be obviously be combat, there will be loss of life, the horses will be gone. I mean, we're at that point. It is that breaking point. Reed will send tanks, his armored cars, his trucks out to block the entrance into Hostel, and there will literally be a standoff. The Russians, they stop, they stop their armored cars, they stop their tanks to get out, and they're screaming and they're hollering at the Americans, ordering them to get out of the way, calling them traitor, calling them every name under the book. And don't forget, we are the ones in the wrong. This is their territory. This is their country. According to the Yalta Conference, diplomatically, this is their possession. These are their horses. But we just know it's going to happen, and we're not going to move. So with all the, we're yelling, the hollering, the screaming, the ordering to move, we will stand our ground. But so will they. 2 days. For 2 days, we will stand our freaking ground, back and forth, trying to figure out what in the world is freaking fixing to happen here. Well, the Russians aren't in any hurry. If they can't get in, that's just fine. They send off word, they send off troops with word of the situation. They put their feet up on the freaking dashboard, and they're sitting there waiting for their next orders, which they know will be to attack. Can't attack until they get the official order, but they're not in a hurry, so they're going to sit in their cars and they're just going to wait. We're the ones that feel the time of the essence. We're the ones that feel the panic. So after a 2-day standoff, from May 12th to May 14th, May 14th, it's very, very clear that the Russians are sitting, riders have ridden off. Russian new orders will be coming. The orders, the writing is on the wall. Everyone knows what's at risk here. We have no time to wait. And the goal is set. The plan is set in motion for the next morning to get out. To get the hell out. Now, again, for 2 weeks, we have been planning. People throughout history who did make a name for themselves, like First Lieutenant William Culloden. For 2 weeks, he's been building horse vans. He's been taking German flatbed trucks, building sides, building ramps. We have over 1,000 freaking horses, guys. We've had to put a plan in motion to decide what horses they're going to be sent with who. What are we going to do with the prisoners of war? Which prisoners of war are going to be willing to partake in this? Which ones do we need to find van room for too and move? We thought we had more time, but now we have a freaking matter of hours. And for all throughout the night of the 14th, we were just like freaking little red ants whose anthill got kicked over, scattering, trying to get this whole thing together, right? Which we do. And bless his heart, to his credit, Colonel Radusky, for the entire night, is down there with a hammer and nails, helping build ramps, helping move horses, helping load supplies, helping get people and everything set in the location. So the morning, before light, in the dark, in the early morning hours of May 15th, this thing is set in motion. All the mares and babies will be loaded up these quickly built ramps into these shakily built armored cars that are now turned into horse vans. All of them will be loaded into vans. Everything will be set, all supplies loaded, and in the dark, under the cover of darkness, the Americans will head out. With both the veterinarians, Lessing and Kroll, going with them to oversee the safety and the condition of the horses. All the Americans, all the prisoners of war, everybody's leaving. This thing is been desolated, except for one man. Colonel Radusky refuses to leave. The horses are gone, all his men are gone, the veterinarians are gone, Americans are gone. But everyone knows at this point he will be seen as one of the biggest traitors amongst his own army. And his family is in the area. Knowing how he will be seen, worrying about what's going to happen to his family once all this comes out, he just can't justify leaving. So, knowing what was most likely coming his way, which, by the way, he and his family did end up being seen as as traitors, taken as prisoners of war, and after this is all said and done, he will spend about 9 months inside a German internment camp, he and his family. But for the moment, he refuses to move because he's not going to leave his family. So he watches out the window of his office as all the armored cars, the horses, everyone head out. in the dead of night and start this trek to the safe location of Germany. Now, it's about a 2-day trek, and overall it goes pretty dang smoothly. It's a 4-wave trek. First day, the first wave, obviously, you will have a man by the name of Captain Thomas Scott, who is the son of a senator from Tennessee, will lead this procession. Obviously, he'll be in a Jeep, but with all the vans, the trucks, and armored cart, with the mares and foals, being up the first wave. And then everybody else, all the other horses have been broken down into like 3 herds. And this is where you can think Wild West style, y'all. You got all these herds of horses that will just be rounded up and pushed and led by Americans, Germans, and a lot of civilian PO war volunteers. Again, the Brits, the French, New Zealanders, Serbians, all these prisoners of war who can ride and are willing to help will all be mounted on the Spanish riding school, Lipizzaners stallions. And literally, in Wild West cowboy fashion, they will each have their own herd of horses they're responsible for to push and safely drive across the country of Czechoslovakia into Germany. With all of the horse herds about 20 or 30 minutes apart, so that we all don't get bunched up, stallions fighting, etc., that type of thing. But it's quite the trek. It's tried the event. It takes about 2 days, and again, does go safely, overall at first, the whole brigade. I was stopping at night, obviously stopping to let the horses rest, let them get water, feed them, etc., etc. A lot of the horses who are being pushed by the mounted cavalry, they get sore. They're not used to having to cover that much distance in a amount of days. So Lessing and Kroll are kept busy, keeping the horses, cared for to the best of their ability. But 2-day trek basically goes without a hitch until we hit. I mean, we're scot-free. All we gotta do is get over that German border. We're scot-free. Well, the afternoon of day 2, we get to that border to find a barrier. There are partisan soldiers, foot soldiers, who are loyal now to Russia, who have put up a barricade with the goal of not letting us through. They're going to stop us and take all these horses in the name of Russia, decide what to do with them, right? So, as we hit the German border, a portion, one of the 3 herds of horses that are being, rounded up and led by all the mounted cavalry, we hit, they're in front. The veterinarian Rudolf Lessing is leading this, so they are the first to come upon these partisan soldiers and this barricade, right? And Lessing is German, duh. But so he's dressed in German uniform. And now you've got German soldier and partisan soldiers, loyal to Russia in a standoff. Lessing tries to explain to them that this is an American outfit, they need to get out of the way, that the partisan soldiers are armed with machine guns, they're armed with, with different types of rifles, bayonets, and they're told they're not going anywhere. Confrontation back and forth, yelling back and forth, screaming back and forth, hollering. This thing is starting to go. Voices are getting raised, tempers are being raised, guns being fired into the air. This group of horses are, these soldiers are trying to, loose horses that they're trying to keep together with the stallions start to panic, some start to bolt, everyone's attention gets discombobulated. It gets to the point where one of Lessing's men is pulled off of his stallion to the ground by one of the partisan soldiers, and was fixing to be beat by these partisan soldiers with their guns. Thankfully, just before the soldier starts to get beat, up rides First Lieutenant Quillivan with his hand unclipping his side holster hip, ready to pull out a gun if need be, coming up screaming and wanting to know what in God's name is going on here. Not far behind them are armored cars applied with cannon. So Lessing explains the situation. Quillivan, who is an American soldier, takes control, tells the partisan soldiers, get out of the dang way. To which again they say no. Quillivan's had enough. This is ridiculous. The soldiers keep yelling that they're going to keep them there at all costs till Russians get there and decide what to do with them. But Quillivan says that's not going to happen. And in pure fashion, just like our parents do to us when we're little and we're not listening, Quillivan tells him, I'm giving you to the count of 3 to make the right decision and move. Partisan soldiers call his bluff. So what does Quillivan do? 1. Partisan soldiers start to fumble, they look around, they're getting a little white, especially when the leader of the soldiers look over and see the gun commander of the armored car putting a cannonball in the cannon, shutting the lid. Quillivan. 2. two, that commander went white, turned around, and barked at all of his men to move the barrier. Now, they didn't want to get to 3. The barrier will be moved. The horse, Americans and Germans allowed to cross with all these partisan soldiers sitting there, surly expressions on their face, just chomping, grinding their teeth, but watching as this barely controlled, mass now of Lipizzaners, stallions, thoroughbreds, Arabs, cross, thunder across the bridge into German territory. Americans getting every one of those horses safely across, all men, all POWs, into German territory, where they are once and finally, forever, at this point, safe. Even Lessing himself, upon finally getting to set foot into German territory and knowing the danger was off, they were safe, makes the statement, we really felt in our hearts that we were saved. Actually saved. Now we knew nothing could happen to us, right? This was over. We had done it. We were okay. So were all the horses. Once everyone is in, they're going to obviously take all the horses, everyone will move and be taken to retake quarters inside of Germany. Which, ironically enough, as Reed and everyone arrives at the headquarters in Germany, the first person to come out and meet them is none other than Alois Pajowski himself, the Olympian rider from 1936, who had been in command all this time of that Spanish riding school in Vienna. All these years, all this time that his stallions, the majority, about 95% of his stallions, had been hostile. Again, Pajowski had been a part of the German army, and he had been given the command of protecting the little village of St. Martin. But at the same time, he still had a handful, 4 or 5 stallions with him at all times, because one of his other responsibilities and goals was to perform for generals and colonels and majors that had come through the area to put on special performances, some type of lighthearted entertainment. And it just so happened that early May 1945, he'd been asked to put on a special presentation for none other than General George Patton, who was in the area visiting the general. Pajowski's never been more nervous to put on a presentation than this, than putting one on in front of Patton himself. He prepares for days upon days upon days, like practices hardcore, people. But, Patton is there, they do perform. By the way, turns out they performed on May 8th, 1945, which just happens to be the day the entire war with Germany comes to an end, right? It is the day the war officially entered Germany. This special presentation for General Patton will be put on. Now, Patton himself, before joining the military, had also been an Olympian. He had ridden for the United States in the 1912 Olympics, years before Pajowski did. But Pajowski, after his performance came to an end, he had halted in the middle of the arena and he's looking at Patton. And later asked what he had been thinking. His exact quote, he says, "It was one of the most important moments of my life. In a little Austrian village, in a decisive hour, 2 men faced each other for the first time. Both having fought for the Olympic crown for their countries. Although now they met in such unequal terms. The one, a triumphant conqueror, in a war waged with such bitterness. The other, a member of a defeated nation. But right here, this day, they were equal." And just happened to, as they were talking after Pajowski has his presentation. This is a picture of Pajowski talking to Patton after the presentation. He was, the communication at Hostel had been down for weeks. He had no way to know what was happening. If the Russians had found the farm, the condition of his horses, right? And Patton was able to tell him they were safe. Now, Patton assumes they're already safe. It's still a little early, but long story short, Pajowski is told his horses are under American protection, and it turns out they're on the way to Germany. So when news broke finally that on May 17th, the horses were safely in Germany, Patton contacted Pajowski and offered to fly him to Germany, where he could finally meet up with the horses he'd been apart from for all that time. So as soon as Reed and all the horses would get there, the first person out the door, in tears, by the way, just sobbing, is Pajowski to meet his stallions. We did it, y'all. The ghost soldiers of General Patton got the job done. Everyone is safe. And now, once we knew, the war is over. Everyone is going to receive orders to go a different direction, to go home if need be. But now Reed is kind of worried. Now that the war is over and he's going to be sent back to the United States, well, what is going to happen to all the horses? Right, making sure that none of them end up going to, a bad location. But thankfully, it all works out, right? So, because Lessing and Kroll will remain with the horses and ensure that all of them that they could possibly find will be returned home to the homes, returned to the homes they have been stolen and kidnapped for throughout Russia. Because don't forget, they're all branded. It takes some time, but we can find out who belongs to who. On top of that, now there are some accounts depending on what book you read, what internet source you read. There's accounts that say that Reed and the Americans were allowed, some accounts say they were allowed to take back to the United States with them 100 horses. Most say 150, so that's what I went with. There's another account I read online that I'm not sure is credited that said 200. But most of them say about 150 horses or so were given to Reed to take back to the United States, where they too were sold into private homes or breeding facilities, to be taken care of well from now on. But regardless if it was 100, 150, 200, however many they left with, they returned home. If it was 150, they returned home with 151. Because one of the mayors actually gave birth on the ship, going across the Atlantic, back to the United States. So the first time his little feet touched down on solid land was in the United States. Wojcicki was allowed to take back to Austria with him all the mares and foals that had been at Hostal, obviously along with all of the stallions, and take basically all of his Hussars back to Hostal, where they will be the primary headquarters and hotspot for the breeding and performing still to this day. Now, over today, as of January 20th, 2020, there is an estimated 8,500 Lipizzan horses in the world today, purebred Lipizzan horses in the world today, 1,150 inside the United States, all having different owners, different roles, being used for different reasons, but still, as of up to this day, the most infamous, the most famous, the most noted, the most phenomenal are those that appear in the Spanish riding school in Vienna. And just to conclude, we got about a minute and a half video of what these horses, and they're all descendants of those from World War II, what they do today.